Imagine stepping into a crime scene so completely pristine that investigators use the word immaculate. That is exactly what sources now claim about the interior of Nancy's home, showing zero evidence of any physical attack. We need to rethink everything that might have unfolded behind those closed doors. Ever since this tragedy made national news, Savannah Guthrie faced the press to announce her mother had vanished. A specific theory instantly took root across every news banner broadcast and public discussion. People pictured absolute destruction, signs of a brutal brawl, or obvious carnage that could justify how a lady gets abducted from her own residence during the dead of night. While reporters never explicitly stated it outright, the underlying message remained heavily present across all broadcasts. Between the secured entryways, unusually quiet witnesses, and rapid police deployment, absolutely all signs heavily hinted at a genuinely horrifying discovery awaiting detectives inside. Everyone expected absolute proof of a struggle. Then Brian Enton dropped a massive bombshell at 5:36 in the evening on March 31st. Pay close attention to his exact phrasing. If you analyze his words thoroughly, absolutely every single assumption regarding the interior of Nancy Guthrie's residence suddenly becomes incredibly murky. He's murky. An anonymous insider claims the property lacked any indication of a physical altercation indoors. Going even further, this informant specifically characterized multiple living areas as entirely flawless, totally pristine, leading detectives to conclude that zero violence actually occurred within Nancy's personal sanctuary. Informants reported an incredibly tidy dwelling, heavily emphasizing that specific spaces looked completely untouched. Really think about that particular phrasing carefully for a moment, considering it hardly qualifies as standard police jargon. That adjective carries serious weight. Detectives never call a murder location pristine without intending to highlight a massive anomaly. This distinction pierces right through the central mystery. Detectives have seemingly avoided confronting this inconsistency since the probe began. Assuming the victim's residence remained perfectly neat, without any trace of combat, what horrifying detail prompted the initial responding officers to escalate things? What exactly did they witness upon entry that forced Sheriff Nanos to instantly assign a top homicide investigator to the file right out of the gate? Former federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer demanded an answer to that exact riddle hours after the stunning update. We plan to thoroughly dissect this crucial dilemma throughout today's deep dive, because uncovering the actual truth would completely alter our entire understanding of the timeline. Let us examine the established facts regarding the bloody entryway. We must clarify this before breaking down the insider leaks. We need to establish a solid, factual foundation. Many of you have followed this mystery obsessively, meaning absolutely every tiny discrepancy carries immense weight. The prominent television host's mother inexplicably vanished from her Tucson residence at the start of 2026. Our past episodes already thoroughly explored the chronological breakdown of that fateful evening. Today, we are solely focusing on the grim discoveries made by local police during their initial property sweep. The Pima County authorities officially verified one chilling fact. Detectives located biological fluid smeared directly across the primary doorway of the victim's house. Laboratory analysis positively identified those specific stains as belonging to Nancy. Furthermore, renowned journalist Ashley Banfield shared exclusive details regarding the splatter formation on her true crime audio series. She claimed a distinct trail of consistent drops spilled outward past the doorframe. These perfectly uniform marks appeared entirely untouched by any human interference. In practical terms, investigators found an obvious crimson path trickling directly from the interior foyer, spilling out past the main structural entry point. What you saw is a structural entry point. Let me clarify our exact information pipeline right now. Maintaining journalistic integrity remains the core mission of this platform. Official lab results verifying Nancy's biological material at the gate are completely undeniable. The sheriff explicitly verified this. The vivid narrative about the droplets migrating outdoors stems entirely from Banfield's independent reporting. Unverified by police brass, this solitary tip lacks formal backing. We simply relay the claim properly, credit the original author, and advise healthy skepticism. Relying strictly on verified police bulletins, we unequivocally know a bloody scene existed near the porch. Those stains undeniably belong to the missing woman. The physical arrangement heavily implies active outward progression. Someone was clearly exiting the property, moving away from internal living spaces. This brings us to Enton's latest bombshell revelation. He credits an anonymous individual who supposedly possesses intimate knowledge of the ongoing police work. This informant insists the dwelling lacked any internal damage, indicating a fight. They even characterize specific living quarters by explicitly quoting the exact word, immaculate. Consider the glaring paradox presenting itself here. We have Nancy's verified bodily fluids spilling toward the street, heavily suggesting an exit juxtaposed against a perfectly serene, indoor environment reported by police insiders. Both realities might technically be true simultaneously. However, they force us to critically analyze the exact origin point of the physical attack, deeply questioning how her final terrifying minutes indoors actually played out. Let us briefly dive into the intense science behind splatter analysis. Finding biological material near an entryway carries massive investigative weight for detectives. In fact, this specific geographic placement might honestly represent the single greatest clue available to authorities right now. Doorways act as crucial transitional borders. While that sounds slightly philosophical, it holds critical forensic value. Stepping over that frame marks the dangerous shift from a secure private haven straight into an unpredictable public domain. Whenever crime scene techs discover biological evidence near an exit, their absolute first immediate priority involves flawlessly calculating the victim's exact physical trajectory. Discovering stains pooled within the actual foyer, clinging to the inner jambs, or heavily coating the hardwood directly approaching the exit strongly indicates a definite outward progression toward the yard. The victim might have been running independently forced out at gunpoint, physically hoisted, or violently pulled across the floorboards. Conversely, the splatter might concentrate heavily on the outdoor porch or begin exactly at the doorframe before continuing outside. That specific grouping heavily implies the initial trauma happened during the exit process. Perhaps a sudden ambush, a frantic tumble, or a devastating strike landed exactly at the boundary line. Based on Banfield's completely unverified insider leaks, the crimson spots formed a very noticeable path crossing the jamb and spilling into the yard. That specific exterior momentum completely alters the investigative narrative. It paints a vivid picture of dynamic ongoing injury. We are analyzing a fluid, highly mobile crisis. The violence clearly stretched beyond the living room. Now combine that chilling revelation with Enton's informant insisting the primary living quarters looked completely pristine. Let us assume the indoor areas genuinely remained untouched. Imagine a scene entirely lacking broken lamps or noticeable scuff marks. That makes the entryway splatter infinitely more critical. It proves the catastrophic event generating those stains occurred directly at the exit rather than deep within the safety of her bedroom. 1 second she stood in her hallway and the next she vanished into thin air entirely at that solitary threshold. Make no mistake, this was never a spontaneous attack or some crime of opportunity. This was an absolutely calculated extraction. Assuming foul play, the individual who snatched Nancy Guthrie possessed intimate details about her schedule and exact whereabouts. They expertly navigated her extraction from the property without leaving a single trace of chaos inside. That red stain near the entryway remains our sole physical proof, indicating that a violent physical altercation actually occurred. Just ponder the staggering logistics behind a vanishing act like this. Executing such a flawless abduction requires immense foresight, unrestricted entry, and deeply intimate familiarity with Nancy's daily habits, her residence, and her usual whereabouts. My viewers know we already exhaustively analyzed the rear entry theories here. We also heavily debated if a close acquaintance orchestrated the event, questioning if the culprit possessed insider secrets that an ordinary outsider fundamentally lacked. When you combine Banfield's Crimson Trail details with the insider claiming the house was spotless, a chilling reality emerges. Merging these facts makes a spur-of-the-moment or accidental tragedy incredibly hard for anyone to logically believe. Everything screams premeditated and highly focused. Finding vital fluids right by the escape route inevitably forces us to ask, did she anticipate trouble and walk outside on her own accord, or was she violently dragged? Fluid trajectory naturally introduces debates about manipulation versus compliance. However, an entirely separate facet of these crimson clues remains wildly underreported by mainstream media, directly tying into the crucial inquiries brought up by Jennifer Coffindaffer. Let us dive deeper into that. Analyzing the trajectory of crimson splatters reveals way more than mere travel paths to detectives. It actually exposes the victim's physical condition during the incident, differentiating tracks made by walking individuals from others. A person stumbling around under their own momentum leaves a completely distinct splatter signature compared to an incapacitated victim being hauled or pulled across the floor. Gap distances between the splatters, the specific contours of each mark, and the overall flow all serve as critical investigative metrics. Natural leakage dropping from an upright mobile victim inevitably creates a highly recognizable circular splatter profile. Once a bleeding individual starts walking, those circular marks stretch out into ovals, often featuring tiny secondary splashes pointing straight toward their travel destination. Conversely, hauling a wounded body parallel to the ground completely alters the visual evidence. The layout shifts, the distances warp, and the underlying physical mechanics totally transform. Of course, the official laboratory documents remain hidden from the public eye. We remain utterly clueless about the definitive conclusions the local sheriff's department reached regarding the doorway stains. Even so, early journalistic accounts explicitly detail a continuous stream of crimson traveling straight across the entryway and heading outside. Assuming those details hold true, they strongly suggest active locomotion rather than a stationary victim bleeding into a puddle. It paints a picture of dynamic transit right through the exit. However, what remains incredibly ambiguous is the victim's autonomy during this horrific event. we still cannot determine if the injured party willingly navigated toward the exit or if they were forcefully propelled. Being violently coerced is a massive possibility, yet the term flawless radically complicates our understanding instead of clarifying it. If she voluntarily strolled toward the exit under her own steam, her mobility raises huge alarms, meaning investigators absolutely must identify the exact catalyst that lured her there. What prompts a sleeping resident to approach their entryway during the pitch-black midnight hours? Something incredibly persuasive forced her awake, demanding she unlatch the lock, narrowing our motives down to deep familiarity or lethal threats. Furthermore, finding absolutely zero indications of a violent domestic brawl or forced entry heavily amplifies the likelihood of voluntary compliance. Consequently, whoever actually orchestrated her vanishing act likely shared an established, deeply personal relationship with the victim beforehand. They held enough sway to bypass boundaries she would ruthlessly enforce against unknown strangers. My platform has already dedicated hours dissecting how the perpetrators potentially breached her personal sanctuary. While I refuse to rehash those older arguments right now, I strongly urge everyone to keep those underlying themes firmly planted in their minds. Keep pondering the psychology of her front porch interactions as we tackle the core mystery. Ultimately, resolving that psychological puzzle might perfectly mirror the exact horrors responding officers witnessed upon arrival. Those initial observations likely sparked the immediate murder investigation long before the press caught wind. So let us dissect the term spotless and unpack its true, terrifying implications. We desperately need to scrutinize this specific adjective as the internet completely missed its gravity during the initial news drop. Audiences quickly glanced over the terminology, swiped away, and returned to their mindless browsing. However, when dealing with a baffling disappearance where authorities immediately unleash their elite murder squad, such pristine terminology is never tossed around lightly. It carries immense, terrifying weight. That phrasing acts as a massive glaring siren for crime scene technicians. So how do we interpret a pristine environment during a suspected kidnapping? Initially, it implies peaceful conditions, leaving every chair perfectly balanced. Every trinket sits exactly in its designated spot, completely devoid of shattered glass, crimson pools, or chaotic scuffle marks. Taken at face value, the adjective essentially describes a totally serene, unbothered household. Yet veteran detectives inevitably entertain a secondary, deeply disturbing interpretation regarding extreme cleanliness. Sometimes a completely spotless living space is an elaborate artificial illusion crafted by a killer. Perpetrators frequently sanitize locations and manufacture fake narratives. When cops enter a missing woman's residence only to discover specific areas looking artificially flawless and suspiciously pristine, alarms start ringing. Suddenly, such flawless tidiness morphs into a massive red flag. We have actually analyzed theatrical crime environments previously. We frequently debated the implications of someone meticulously doctoring Nancy's residence before the cavalry arrived. Imagine a culprit frantically scrubbing surfaces, hiding objects, and entirely erasing the authentic narrative of that fatal night. Let me be absolutely transparent. Nobody truly knows which specific theory aligns with the insider's bold claims. I am definitely not confirming a massive cover-up occurred here. Instead, I'm simply arguing that calling a location flawless raises a million terrifying questions rather than providing solid answers. The fascinating reality of cover-ups is their inherent flawfulness. Criminals inevitably overlook tiny details, frequently overcompensating by leaving the area suspiciously sanitized. Furniture layouts appear unnaturally calculated and stiff. A glaring disconnect forms between the serene environment and the brutal reality detectives know occurred within those walls. Consequently, these bizarre psychological mismatches and microscopic biological errors become the exact gold mines that veteran forensics experts eagerly hunt for. Therefore, when the anonymous informant specifically selected the term spotless to describe selective quarters, we must pause. You have to question the true motive behind leaking that exact phrasing. Was the informant merely trying to comfort terrified locals by denying any obvious domestic bloodshed? Alternatively, could this leaker be subtly broadcasting that the sheer lack of clutter was genuinely bizarre enough to raise major police suspicions? Their vocabulary feels incredibly calculated, highlighting specific zones rather than the whole house. That tiny distinction screams volumes, inevitably, forcing us to wonder about the remaining areas. We remain completely in the dark as the initial tweet offered zero further context. By intentionally highlighting the tidiness of selective areas, the informant heavily hints that other quarters looked drastically different. Deciphering exactly which sections of the house remain perfectly untouched is a vital mystery my platform will relentlessly monitor moving forward. If future leaks confirm a stark contrast between serene living rooms and chaotic, heavily scrutinized biological zones, the entire narrative violently flips. Forget the official "nothing to see here" narrative, because the actual evidence screams a completely different, darker reality. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer wasted no time destroying that illusion with 3 razor-sharp inquiries just hours after Enton published his update. Her chilling public reaction definitely lacked any comfort. You absolutely must hear these inquiries. Before breaking down Coffindaffer's exact words, we have to establish the background first. Grasping the true weight behind her perspective is crucial for understanding this case. Her authority stems not merely from her impressive federal background, but rather her unflinching, blunt commentary throughout this entire investigation. She refuses to sugarcoat things or hide behind the usual excuse that police hold secret knowledge, unlike other experts. If the details feel wrong, she calls out the lies immediately. Reacting to Enton's findings, she publicly laid out 3 highly specific piercing inquiries for everyone to see. The absolute most volatile inquiry of the trio requires deep background to fully comprehend, which goes like this. Assuming the residents truly lacked any struggle indicators, what prompted Sheriff Nanos to deploy a murder investigator immediately on day 1, we must dedicate a massive chunk of our breakdown to that specific mystery purely because the answer remains incredibly complex. This probes a highly intentional strategic move executed by the top police commander during the critical initial phases of the manhunt. Prior to tackling that mystery, we need to examine her other 2 points, considering they provide absolutely essential foundational clues. Honestly, they anchor everything. Coffindaffer's second public inquiry targeted the lack of indoor attack signs, evaluating how that blank slate alters our forensic timeline. Assuming nobody ambushed Nancy indoors, meaning the inner rooms remained pristine, then the actual violence, assuming an attack occurred, unfolded somewhere else entirely. It might have sparked at the doorway inside a car or at an entirely different spot. Every single one of those scenarios brings wildly shifting consequences for the detective work. Indoor attacks always leave physical trails behind. We are talking about genetics, crimson stains, scuff tracks, smudged entryways, scattered debris, or snapped fingernails buried in rugs. Investigators easily catalog those exact traces to construct a solid prosecution. Conversely, outdoor violence presents nightmares. Events unfolding near entryways inside automobiles or off-site become intensely difficult to piece together, particularly when hours tick by and storms wash away crucial outdoor clues. By phrasing her thought this way, Coffindaffer basically demands to know the exact location of the physical proof if the house is clean. Furthermore, did the ticking clock and environmental contamination completely destroy any chance of salvaging those remaining outdoor clues? Let me be incredibly accurate regarding her final point, which she broadcasted via social media on March 31st, of focusing entirely on the specific blood characteristics. Acknowledging the verified crimson stains near the entrance, alongside an untouched home interior, what exact narrative does that splatter formation reveal to the detectives? Did a solitary strike cause immediate trauma? Or are we looking at continuous hemorrhaging stretched across a wider area? Banfield previously detailed a trail of splatter stretching past the entryway and leading away from the main residence. Could those specific red markings definitively prove if a wounded Nancy walked away independently, or if someone forcibly relocated her? Nobody's just thinking out loud here. A seasoned federal veteran poses these exact queries whenever an insider suddenly injects terms like spotless into the public dialogue. Finally, we arrive at the massive anomaly. The strategic push for a murder probe immediately. What drove Sheriff Nanos to involve a lethal crimes expert on day 1? Everyone can verify this undeniable fact, as numerous major news networks already corroborated the timeline. Right at the very start of the frantic search for the missing Nancy Guthrie, long before locating any remains, determining a fatality reason, or grasping the sheer magnitude of the tragedy Pima County authorities sent in their top murder squad. Listen closely, because you must grasp the heavy bureaucratic weight behind that specific command. People unaccustomed to police tactics mistakenly assume departments take these extremes simply for precaution. That never happens, as murder units remain an incredibly rare hyper-focused asset. Within regional precincts like this one, those elite officers strictly manage fatal incidents, highly questionable demises, slayings, and any situation indicating a victim perished from malicious external forces rather than health issues or suicide. Commanders rarely waste their time on standard runaway or vanishing individual reports during the initial stages. Routine vanishing complaints automatically funnel straight toward the dedicated search division or a basic investigations team, or perhaps a specialized vulnerable victim task force based on the demographics. Bringing a lethal crimes expert aboard immediately requires a heavily calculated executive-level ruling that completely shifts the category. That move essentially screams, "Our gathered intelligence strongly indicates this situation features a questionable fatality or outright murder." I need to repeat that realization for maximum impact. Bringing in the heavy hitters on day 1 is absolutely never just some protective measure. It goes way beyond playing it safe. Top brass made a calculated tactical ruling that the sinister nature of her vanishing pointed directly toward a brutal, fatal offense. Yet suddenly an insider leaks details to Brian Enton, claiming several interior spaces within the Guthrie residence remain completely spotless. Zero indications of an indoor struggle exist. This begs an urgent query. What exactly did the responding patrolman witness? What horrors lurked behind those walls? Which glaring red flags did the initial uniformed cops spot that forced them to bypass standard search protocols. They skipped the basic squad entirely and triggered a full-blown murder hunt. Despite informants whispering about an untouched home, things fail to add up. Puddles of crimson definitely stained the doorway. Genetic markers proved it. However, the current narrative fed to the public outlines an environment that, when viewed independently, mirrors a forced kidnapping from a theoretically safe environment. That remains incredibly severe. Snatching someone carries federal charges immediately looping in national syndicates while flagging the file for kidnapping risks. Automatically escalating this to a murder unit makes zero sense unless the horrifying discoveries, visual proof, and initial logs from those first cops demanded it. Command received a terrifying, highly classified update from the field. Whatever those deputies saw guaranteed one grim reality: they were searching for a ghost, as Nancy Guthrie was already gone. Let me set the record straight right now, because we refuse to blindly guess what that grim discovery actually entailed. Our goal isn't to toss out wild theories regarding hidden clues at the scene. Instead, we are shining a massive spotlight on a glaring contradiction. You simply cannot have perfectly clean rooms alongside an immediate murder squad deployment without some missing puzzle piece connecting those two wildly different realities. Authorities continue keeping that vital missing link completely under wraps. Consequently, the incredibly sharp inquiry raised by Jennifer Coffin Daffer hits like an absolute freight train. Her query is entirely genuine and rooted in deep expertise. She understands perfectly well that bringing in murder investigators represents a definitive tactical pivot rather than a mere safety precaution. She openly argues that the scenario painted by Anton's informant, a spotless house with just a few drops at the entrance, hardly warrants calling in the heavy hitters from the very start. A crucial detail remains hidden in the shadows right now. To truly grasp the narrative this location conveys, we must zoom out and analyze this entire web of clues through a detective's lens. Once you assemble these fragmented details, a distinctly chilling hypothesis regarding the incident finally takes shape. Please understand that I am offering an evaluation rather than a final verdict, as the difference is absolutely vital. Based strictly on verified reports, the tangible clues paint the following picture. Droplets belonging to the victim stained her entryway. Local authorities verified the genetic match, while Banfield noted the splatter trail deliberately moved away from the doorway and spilled outside. Meanwhile, an insider told Brian Anton that specific indoor areas remained completely pristine, totally lacking any indicators of violence. Imagine standing in the shoes of a crime scene technician, observing those exact parameters. Your initial thought would suggest the conflict either sparked right by the entrance or was meticulously restricted to that specific zone. Any violent altercation that unfolded clearly maintained a tightly controlled perimeter. The injury causing her to bleed exclusively struck right as she exited the residence, never beforehand. This observation brings us back to an agonizing mystery we have debated for weeks. Did she turn that knob on her own? That inquiry carries massive implications for the entire case. Should she have willingly unlatched the deadbolt and walked outside, we can safely eliminate the terrifying idea of a bedroom abduction. It firmly rules out a surprise attack on the couch. At some fundamental level, she independently navigated her way toward the exit, forcing us to ask, did a cunning predator trick her into coming out? Could a familiar face, or perhaps a master manipulator, have coaxed her outside during those late hours? A simple message, or a gentle tapping, might have convinced her she was in absolutely zero danger. Such a scenario perfectly accounts for the undisturbed furniture, since no indoor battle ever occurred. She happily greeted the night, leaving us with merely one other viable interpretation of the forensics. Did an organized offender meticulously sanitize the environment to ensure everything appeared completely peaceful afterward? Might she have been forcefully relocated from deeper within the property? Could the perpetrator have scrubbed away the chaos long before the first patrol cruiser ever pulled up? Previous episodes thoroughly dissected the concept of a tampered environment. We also deeply explored the possibility of a rear entry ambush. Intimate familiarity with her daily routines, household layout, and personal relationships points toward a highly specific type of suspect. A spotless living room hardly disproves that hypothesis. Frankly, it actually strengthens the argument. A brilliantly executed cover-up would perfectly match the pristine conditions reported by the journalist's informant. However, no amount of bleach or vacuuming explains why they immediately dispatched the murder squad. If the culprit truly erased their tracks, responding officers would have merely encountered the serene environment mentioned in those leaks. Tidy rooms, a few red droplets, and an absent resident scream kidnapping. That unquestionably signals a massive emergency. Yet it hardly screams murder unless the cleanup crew missed a glaring red flag. The patrolman on scene must have spotted a critical error and radioed it straight to the top brass. Whatever they discovered proved catastrophic enough to instantly label the crisis a fatality. We remain completely in the dark about that specific detail, yet grasping the gravity of this mystery is paramount because the sheriff's rapid deployment of homicide units is hardly a minor footnote hidden inside a boring stack of paperwork. That rapid escalation serves as our clearest window into the grim reality police expected during those frantic opening hours of the hunt. Furthermore, a murder decree fiercely clashes with rumors of an absolutely pristine household. The reality the sheriff witnessed directly contradicts the narrative we were fed. This entire presentation has been steering you toward one definitive query, and I swore we would confront it head-on. The time has come to rip the Band-Aid off. Consider the cyclical paradox at play here. A citizen vanishes into thin air, leaving behind genetic material that distinctly splatters away from her own doorway. Simultaneously, an anonymous tipster insists that multiple living spaces within the property remained completely untouched. Zero broken furniture or scuffle marks exist. Yet the local precinct still launched a full-blown murder probe within hours of her vanishing. The core dilemma I need you to wrestle with is how those final two elements manage to coexist. These are certainly not trivial little inconsistencies. They represent a fundamental crack in the official storyline. Should the indoor environment truly lack chaos pointing solely toward a lady casually strolling outside, the math simply fails. The publicly disclosed clues drastically fall short of the terrifying threshold required to trigger an immediate murder protocol. Nevertheless, the sheriff pulled that trigger immediately. We only have a handful of logical avenues to resolve this massive discrepancy. The primary theory suggests the informant left out massive chunks of truth. They were not necessarily deceitful, just highly selective with their details. Perhaps that spotless description merely applied to a few rooms, while hidden corridors screamed of absolute terror. Earlier, we highlighted the journalist's careful phrasing, specific spaces rather than the entire property. That vital caveat changes everything. Assuming a few sections remain tidy, while the rest descended into chaos, the picture shifts. Should the crime scene technicians have uncovered a much darker tale in the unmentioned zones, the confusion clears up. A swift murder classification suddenly feels completely justified. It practically guarantees the cops possess a mountain of horrific secrets they refuse to share. The flawless room narrative remains factually true, yet it is a cleverly deployed half-truth. Another compelling possibility dictates that tangible indoor clues never drove the murder classification anyway. Instead, detectives relied on background intel regarding her toxic social circle. Past stalking incidents or severe warnings might have tipped off the badge wearers before they even stepped off the porch, proving this was never a simple runaway or standard kidnapping. They stared down a nightmare scenario from the jump. Consequently, the drastic shift to a death hunt stemmed purely from that chilling background data, completely ignoring the peaceful living room. Let this terrifying reality sink in. The alternative theory strongly suggests that authorities were already hiding a massive secret. They likely possessed crucial evidence long before the media caught wind of the story, keeping a vital piece of the puzzle completely hidden from the public. Then there is a third possibility, something we will mention clearly without stating it as absolute truth. Bringing in murder investigators immediately meant someone knew exactly what transpired behind those doors. We are talking beyond the bloody entryway or the pristine interior. Officers surely noted an undisclosed detail on site that perfectly resolves the very issue Jennifer Coffin-Daffer keeps bringing up. Nobody knows which theory hits the mark, but they are all entirely valid possibilities that must be measured against the official story, especially considering the specific statements Sheriff Nanos offered the press. The man provided nothing but empty promises, formal media briefings, and the standard bureaucratic jargon you hear during any active manhunt. Yet he utterly failed to clarify why murder cops took over immediately, especially when an inside contact claimed several areas of the vanished lady's residence were completely spotless. The massive disconnect separating the sheriff's rapid tactical moves from the reported condition of the house is incredibly glaring. Far from a simple paperwork error, this is a massive red flag that seasoned experts such as Jennifer Coffin-Daffer spot instantly and challenge without hesitation. Furthermore, armed with your current knowledge, you absolutely must refuse to ignore this glaring inconsistency as we map out our current position and the road ahead. Brian Enton released his findings at 5:36 in the evening on March 31st, racking up over 54,000 views already, and these insider leaks could change everything. If accurate, this data completely shatters our previous understanding of the events inside Nancy Guthrie's residence by providing a very specific isolated tip revealing absolutely no struggle occurred indoors, leaving multiple living spaces in completely pristine condition. Authorities officially verified discovering Nancy's blood near the entryway, laying in a specific pattern that insiders suggest points directly toward the exterior. Multiple major news networks also verify the undeniable reality that Sheriff Nanos threw murder investigators at this mystery from the very beginning. Jennifer Coffin-Daffer went on the record to highlight the glaring issue connecting these three bizarre data points. We demand a response not from internet sleuths, but directly from the state authorities managing this inquiry, who possessed these crucial details long before leaks fed them to us. What exactly caught the attention of those initial patrolmen? And what secrets remained hidden behind those walls? Which specific details entered the initial police logs to instantly trigger a murder probe before the media even caught wind of anything suspicious? Our team refuses to drop this crucial detail, and we are currently crafting new content to explore alternate perspectives on this bizarre mystery. These fresh perspectives tie perfectly into the broader narrative of our investigation, including the secondary extortion letter, the local deputy's involvement, and the adjacent real estate. That discarded coat alone feeds into the massive puzzle of Nancy Guthrie's fate and whether the official police story aligns with the grim reality they are hiding. For this moment, however, your absolute priority must be keeping that glaring contradiction at the front of your mind. Jotted on paper, if necessary, a trusted insider explicitly called the interior of that residence completely flawless. Yet the chief officer handling her vanishing immediately treated it like a murder scene. These wildly conflicting details demand a clear resolution. So stay tuned for our next update. One of the most powerful lessons in this story is that truth is not always loud. Sometimes it hides behind silence appearances and assumptions. People often rush to build conclusions from fear rumors or dramatic headlines, but real understanding requires patience, compassion, and careful thinking. This reminds us that life is full of moments when things seem clear on the surface, yet the deeper reality is far more complex. A quiet room does not always mean peace. A confident story does not always mean truth. That is why we must learn to look beyond first impressions and value facts over speculation. More importantly, this situation teaches us to cherish the people we love while we still can. Home should be a place of safety, trust, and care. Families and communities must pay closer attention to one another, speak up when something feels wrong, and never ignore the quiet signs that someone may need help. In the end, the greatest message is this: empathy matters, truth matters, and human life matters. When we choose wisdom over gossip, courage over indifference, and compassion over noise, we become the kind of people who help bring light into the darkest moments.